story that must be told. Here's a little story that must be told. Here's a little story. Here's a little story.
My name is Barry Gale. I'm professionally known as Topspin, also known as BLENDIANA JONES, and I am born and raised in Seattle, Washington. I was raised in a home, a Christian home. We were Seventh-day Adventists, which means we went to church on Saturday. My mother's from Panama and my father's from Jamaica, and I was born in '75, kind of neck and neck with the birth of hip-hop. You really necessarily have all of the secular music that was out. I remember Mahalia Jackson records being in the house, James Brown records like I'm Black and I'm Proud, Andre Crouch, gospel artists, and a lot of the gospel musicians, were musicians that came from the secular world that kind of found the Lord and lent their talents in that direction, but they have like funkiness to them. And even back then, the record player that I'm listening to this Andre Crouch and whatnot on is like the household kind of cabinet system. It's about 6 feet long and big wood cabinet that you open up, and there's this turntable sunken down inside of it. I thought it was pretty fancy because it has kind of a little automated sort of system to it. You could stack 4 or 5 records to be played. There's one record playing, and you could have 4 or 5 more ready to go. So I just gained familiarity with records when Herbie Hancock's Rocket comes out. And Herbie Hancock being the multi-keyboard guy. Synthesizers, the Cosby Show is, that's we're walking into that sort of an era. Sampling is introduced like throughout the households. The Cosby Show episode with Stevie Wonder. Unbeknownst to the room, he's sampling people's voices, and he's asking people's name. Vanessa, he's like, do you have a boyfriend, Vanessa? He's like, and Rudy answers Robert, and then next thing you know, he's Robert. So he's kind of sampling people in the middle of the air without anybody really knowing. But this whole concept of sampling is sort of introduced right on the heels of that. Sony had released the SK1 sampling keyboard 1. And it was a very popular machine. I kind of pined for it that year, got it as a gift. But its whole thing was there was a button on it and you could sample your voice. You could say Barry and it would say Barry and it'd have Barry on all the keys, but at varying speeds from the Barry to Barry. But, and it would have these little demo songs that it would play. So if you sampled your voice, then it would play the demo song, but use your voice as the keyboard. So it's all these berries playing in all these chords. And, that's entertaining to a point. At one point, I found on the back, it said line out. And line in, too. And I was like, you mean you could sample something that's besides your voice? You could have something else coming in here. You can send something into this machine other than your voice. I want to do that, but I want to hear what I'm sending it to. What do I do with this? And through a set of auxiliary cords and Y adapters, I kind of turned my Walkman into this octopus of cords that basically I could be playing something from my Walkman and have it going into this sampler, but with a Y adapter, I could hear, like in the Y adapters, you can make one thing too. So I could, in one hole, I could have it going to my headphones. The other hole, I could have it going to the sampler. I made this whole, basically this kind of a pre-production studio, triggering samples, taping them, playing that tape in my Walkman, triggering more samples on top of a tape full of things that I already pre-triggered, and making these kind of beats, or trying my hand at this kind of hip-hop beat making. I'm not going out record shopping. Like, I don't have a record collection to inherit from my parents outside of kind of Christian-y, gospel-y stuff. And I don't know anything about DJ mechanics. I don't know what a slip mat is. I don't know how they get the record so slippery that they can scratch. So I just like an idiot. I'm putting a record on top of another record. So I'm scratching with my right hand. I'm turning the volume. Like I'm teaching myself the actual mechanics of how a mixer works, because a mixer is really just a function of exposing a signal and hiding a signal. And even scratching is just a mixture of moving a record and hiding parts of the push and the pull. So even if you think about something rhythmically, like chip, 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 those chirps are a function of him exposing the sound and hiding it. Chip, chip, chip. Or hiding, basically, he's hiding the pull. He's only exposing the push. So it's chip, chip, chip. But when pulling back, you're not hearing that, or else it would just sound like a sloppy mess. Anyways, I'm teaching myself that sort of scratching. I'm over, and I'm turning the volume knob down when I want to pull the record back, and I'm giving myself a kind of crash course on what the mechanics of DJing is before I actually have like my own setup. They would still sell boom boxes that have dual cassettes, but they also would sell these towers for hi-fi home systems. It was like a dual cassette and then a graphic equalizer. It was a tuner, dubber, equalizer, the tuner for the radio. On top of it would be a turntable. I would, tape different radio shows, or just even favorite songs, at that point, that's how you would hear music. So if a song you like, you might catch it on the radio and be able to tape it. So I'm making little tiny tapes of just songs that I like and run into. Fresh Tracks was an early show that Nasty Ness was DJing on 1250 K-Fox. And he actually was the first person to have a hip-hop mix show on the West Coast. This particular time, Nasty mixes emerging. I took a page from his sort of a playbook. I went from listening to Rap Attack, taping it. I would make my own version of the show, or a version that inserted myself, basically. So I would have this version of Rap Attack that had these punched-in parts of me. That was, I guess, one of the first times I recorded myself, perhaps, in a DJ form. My first gig was a junior, DJing for seniors with my trusty JVC turntable gifted to me by my guy Merrick, and I had a realistic 5-channel mixer. Hip hop culture is blossoming. Rap groups have their dancers, Heavy D and the Boys. Really just the New Jack Swing of it all, which is Teddy Riley's mixture of kind of gospel chords as mixing with kind of the stabbing and the hits level that sampling had kind of gotten to. Hip-hop production was in its early stages. BLENDIANA Jones, it just was another extension to Topspin as a personality. And I get the idea of making my mixtape sound like the radio show that I wish existed. So my mixtapes I turned into a conceptual thing called KTOP 101.1 KTOP FM, where FM was an asterisk after it, where it stood for Fat Mixtapes. Basically, I made up this call station. I just picked a number. Each tape starts off sounding like a radio station. It sounds like somebody's looking for a radio station. For a lot of it, it was a one-take thing, even to make a master. Like, you could be 33 minutes into it, and if something skips or something like that, you have to sit here and start again. There's no splicing and starting up, and especially if there's magic moments, like you're doing everything. At least I was doing everything. My first titles were like, they were always blend focused from beginning to blend. All good things must come to a blend of the road and a blend of time. That's more memorable now than Topspin to a lot of folks. I'm selling people this tape that sounds like a station that they wish existed. They're coming back to me talking about like, I was looking for this station and I couldn't find it. And I'm like, that makes 0 sense, but that's exactly the reaction I wanted you to have too. So each tape is like broadcast number 1, broadcast number 2. So like I said, I'm sort of training my listening populace to want this station to be real. I'm fooling record labels. I'm getting mail sent to KTOP FM, which is just my mom's house. And I really almost felt like I had to compete and have to be on some sort of radio to get even like labels' attention. When I got to Garfield, it was still sort of incident prone in the early 90s, like fights breaking out at basketball games and incidents here and there that weren't necessarily the safest. Well, I see actually perform at a assembly a group called the Ghetto Children, which is Vitamin D, his friend Bill, B Self, Dan, he went by the Capabilities. There was about 2 other people in the first form of the Ghetto Children. Vitamin was DJing. I believe his turntable was like maybe a Technics 1800 or something like that. I'm hearing his production. I'm like, wow, I think we chop it up, and I'm showing him like I'm making these little kind of rinky-dink joints. At some point, he might invite me over to his house. There's records everywhere. There's, he actually has recording equipment. I'm like, whoa. So that's how songs are made. Skipping a lot of school to go make music. He has a group. I have a group. He's kind of producing for songs for us to develop as a group. Tribal just sort of starts to form as we start spending more time with each other. We met and formed as high school juniors and seniors. We recognized the power and the strength in numbers. Myself, Hussein Kalonji, which is H-Bomb, Francis Onan, who is Infinite, B-Self, who is Bill Ryder, William Ryder from the Ghetto Children, Dan, also a DJ who went by Capabilities, Cliff, who's actually another older mentor, Daryl Preston, who was in Fat Mob, Michael Patterson, who was in Fat Mob, Everett Freeman, who was also in Fat Mob, Erec on the mic, Native Son, whose name was Jermaine Lyons, Chris Gamble, and Taj Randall were Narcotic. We had a little robust amount of folks. We found common ground with each other, and we were just sort of following the blueprints that were laid already. Far Side, Souls of Mischief. There was a lot of like these collectives that had just different groups and these umbrellas. And I guess Wu-Tang was going that direction as well. So, I say it in shorthand these days. We were kind of trying to be the Wu-Tang of Seattle. We're opening for all these people that I'm DJing their music of, the Alcoholics, what I'm saying? Like we are staples. We're in the Flavor magazine, where we are a representation of this flavor. So I wanted to make sure that every person that came within my radius heard that. That's what KTOP was. It was just like it was a vehicle for all that. I need somebody besides myself to hear this. My crew is almost to this day my favorites, because we just make dope stuff. I'm buying records from music menus, places where all these people are working. Supreme turned into an employee at Music Menu. They would have cassette tapes and like crack pipes. I mean, a lot of stuff I was taking cues from people who were more established, like the B Mellows. He was already really established, like all these mom and pop stores all over the country. So to a point, it really was like printing money if you had enough listenership. So it was just finding creative ways to be able to insert what I want to insert and position it next to something I feel is just as good, that in so many ways other people are telling me is just as good. If you like how I mix, then you should trust whatever I play, no matter what I play. So how about some more of the Seattle stuff? We're just as professional. We just don't have a label to co-sign us, and that was the whole thing. Everybody just running around trying to get signed, because that was just the whole story of the music industry and the rap industry at that point. We had other allies who were all part of the Flavor staff, and Flavor, luckily, was a Seattle-centric hip-hop magazine that had the luxury of being distributed throughout Tower Records, United States, Japan. They were really big fans of Tribal, so we might get a review of something, or our demo or something like that. So now there's interest as wide as like Japan or something like that. Untranslated Prescriptions was our first compilation. Do the Math was our second. It was a little bit more notable. We had a little more funding behind that. That kind of had a more of a global splash, along with other notable compilations like Loose Grooves, 14 Fathoms Deep. I've played in Bahrain, in Tanzania, across the U.S., as far as Carnegie Hall. DJ'd there a couple years ago. To say that I touched that stage is a marker I'm proud of. It's young hip-hop landscape, and, you're thinking that even like a place like New York, even though New York is like the mecca as far as where hip-hop it was made, you go there and you hear New York records get played on the radio all the time, and you come back thinking that's just how things work. Everybody with some sort of power like wants their scene to blow up, and that's not necessarily how it works. I'm also a youngster just coming up listening to radio. Rick D's weekly top 40, and I'm having my own kind of relationship with radio itself. I'm thinking that the radio stations at large really have something to do with like the blowing up of a local artist, and that has nothing to do with either of them. All these things, taking these chances, all under for the sake of creativity.